Hi, can you hear me? All right. Novelist and writer Mohsin Hamid said that children are excellent judges of character. Children more often than not have the ability to assess and understand what feels right for them and what's good for them. A current study studying current biology shows that from the age of 3 to develop abilities to assess things and patterns that work for them. I support that children should rate their teachers, and teachers who are significantly and consistently below average should be fired. In this, we assume that the rating teachers works on a proper analytical or questionnaire system provided by schools or experts to analyze answers and come up with a specialized consensus on the meanings of the questionnaire. Since we're talking about a policy change, the rating would be done through proper channels with questions that assess the behavior, method of teaching, method of understanding, and the overall comfort that students feel towards the teacher. However, to maintain favorable relationships, as most surveys and questionnaires work, the results will be confidential. In this, we assume that while children have the freedom of posting on independent sites and are responsible for that, we assume that as a policy change that we're debating, schools will encourage standardized rating and therefore have specialized surveys that test these teachers on various aspects. Significantly and consistently would mean that the teachers are rated way below average by a majority of the students, not just a handful or a particular section of students. And consistently would mean that teachers have had a few opportunities to rectify themselves and implement feedback before they actually get fired. Now, in the effort to push for quality control in education and get the best academic and extracurricular results in the school, children need to be comfortable with their teacher, inspired by what they learn, and maintain cordial relationships to get the best out of being in schools. Teacher evaluations are present in most schools, and since they are a way to communicate areas of development to a child, student evaluations are a way of communicating development to a child. Children should also be allowed to put in their feedback in what they think of teachers. When children rate their teachers, it establishes a two-way trust between the student body and the school staff, thereby promoting mutual understanding and evaluation. According to VRTeachers.com, one of the top 3 reasons students grow dislike for their teachers is because teachers aren't aware or listening to what the children want academically, and teachers have their own expectations and priorities that don't align with the students, and they're not always effective, and they always forget the golden teaching rule that you should teach the way you like to be taught. With changing times and a rapid change in education, teaching methods can quickly get outdated. So when students can evaluate teachers, this works as a streamlined and regular way of receiving feedback so that teachers can correct themselves. The education system is structured to cater to the development of students. And if the academic goals are met by altering methods and paying better attention to their needs and filtering out teachers as and when students want, students should be allowed to rate teachers since their academic progress is priority. If teachers are consistently disfavored and largely show negative in these comprehensive and all-rounded questions, they're all-rounded and they're created by specialized specialized people, then it would be in the best interest of the school itself to fire the teachers that are disfavored.
So I'm going to agree with my opponent that student feedback has some helpfulness. And generally speaking, you want teachers to conform to the student body in a way that's going to make learning conducive. For when teachers are angry or upsetting students or causing conflict, there's not going to be a good environment for learning. However, what I disagree with is the fact that our go-to response for a handful of violations of the student body is firing. That's the reason that I believe that we should vote for the con side in today's debate round. I have one main disadvantage. You can write this down as face value. The resolution does not say that upon student evaluations that are reasonable, teachers should be fired. It doesn't say student evaluations that some other third party has checked through and seen are an actual issue will then be fired. It just says if there's some consistency with how upset students are at a teacher, bam, they go. This would eradicate all form of tenure. It would eradicate virtually any protection that teachers would have against this. So let's start with my opponent's definition. She says, well, we're talking about significance and consistency, so this has to be the majority of students, and it has to happen enough times that the teacher doesn't change after opportunity. I'm fine with these definitions. They're still going to show that it's a bad idea. Let's start off with my argument of face value. The chief problem here is that taking students' opinions at face value and not filtering them and making them accessible, in other words, not simply advising teachers to change, but forcing them to change through the threat of losing their job is bad. 4 subpoints. The first is watering down content. Teachers naturally, their job is to make stuff hard for their students. And naturally, what you see over the course of time is student evaluations typically correlate with a popularity contest. This is according to Philip B. Stark, who's the chair of statistics department at the University of California at Berkeley. He's actually studied the issue of student evaluations handily. He's looked at numerous studies around. This is what he finds. He says, look, the teachers that actually give you the easiest work are the ones that get the highest ratings. That doesn't mean that it's a good teacher. In fact, there's even a negative correlation with job success in students. In other words, the students who have the hardest work work typically end up being the most successful in life, and those are the kids that give the most negative feedback. So if we should really be basing teachers' jobs off of how much the students like them and how positive the reports are, we know exactly what that's going to mean. Teachers are going to be conformed and forced into watering down content and making stuff easy for their students. The second argument, the BSID point, is of extraneous factors. This is that students, most of the time, when you're evaluating effectiveness, I would say students can evaluate stuff like speed or pace or tone, but evaluating the overall effectiveness is a bad idea. Philip B. Stark also talks about how the vast majority of student evaluations include remarks about, oh, well, this guy had a cool mustache. Sometimes they even include sexist or racist behaviors. Sometimes the stuff they include is just directly harmful. The third and the final subpoint is builds the bubble. Look, teachers should be allowed to conflict with students. Look at Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson is a professor at a university in Canada who regularly challenges the political views of his opponents, specifically on the issue of transgenderism. Students would vote him out. That's not a reason to get rid of him. Don't rely on the arbitrary opinions of students.
So as far as you talk about the because we're talking about a policy change and because we're talking about whether this should happen from schools, we would assume that these are facilitated by schools and the tests and the surveys are standardized. Now I just want to talk a little bit before refuting your claims. There's an immediate need to be more student oriented in our education system. According to edutopia.com, an online survey of 883 students from 10 European countries was administrated by 2 researchers, and they wanted to know what students expect and what they experience from their instructors. Overall, the gap between the expected and the experience proved to be overwhelmingly significant because there was no way to communicate and no way to enforce certain things that the students felt. Now, I'd like to cite some studies and publications that support this and where this method of rating teachers and firing them was implemented and the benefits of this. A decade ago, an economist at Harvard called Ronald Ferguson created a revolutionary model of teacher assessment, and the results were consistent from grade to grade across gender and racial divides. Currently, a growing number of school systems are administering the service as a method to overcome teacher resistance in order to link results to salaries and promotions, because that is a good method to do so. In this way, teachers will also have the incentive to constantly perform better, since their student evaluations will result in work, therefore also keeping them in check. According to The Atlantic, 250,000 students took a special survey to capture what they thought of their teachers and the classroom culture. The research saw something remarkable. If you ask kids the right questions, they could identify with uncanny accuracy their most and least effective teachers. Their survey answers, it turned out, had a strong correlation with the academic performances of those sections and were more reliable than any other sources of teacher performance, including classroom observations and student test groups. According to HuffingtonPost.com, in 2012, 6 schools piloted a project in DC and found this method to be more effective than using grades or standardized scores or any other observatory feedback to understand the cause of why students would perform better or poorer. Generally, student test scores and marks were a measure, but teachers consider test score data as an unfair measure to base them on what the students learn, because different students would learn and perform according to their own cognitive ability. Since this shows that test scores can reveal when kids are not learning, they can't reveal why. Student evaluations and student feedback will help reveal why. This might make, because that is the first part of our resolution, and you are against it. This might make teachers relax or despair, but they can't have teachers improve. In 2009, when Bill and Melinda Gates launched a massive project to study 3,000 teachers in 7 cities and learn what made them effective or ineffective, the research methods used many elaborate instruments to gauge effectiveness, including statistical regressions and track changes in students' test scores and panoramic video cameras that captured classroom activity. However, they also included student response. The responses did indeed help predict which classes would have the highest test score improvement, which shows that they do have cognitive correlation with the students are able to cognitively understand what's better for them and which teachers are good for them. And this also allowed for individual thoughts and individual improvement, student aspirations and expectations, and more wholesome approach to teaching.
All right, I'm going to group a lot of my opponent's arguments. First is her argument saying, well, there's no other way that we can communicate effectiveness unless we have student evaluations. My response is solve with incentives. I'm all for giving teachers incentives if they do properly respond to legitimate student evaluations. That's not the resolution we're debating, though. The resolution is that student evaluations that come back, if they come back consistently below average for a teacher, that teacher gets the axe. There's no condition. There's no third party checking this. It's simply look at the evaluations. If they're more than a couple times or the teacher hasn't changed, if they don't come above average, then they're immediately gone. That's what the resolution says. So you can support evaluations. That doesn't mean you support the resolution. The resolution fires teachers, and that's what I take issue true. Second, she says, oh, well, look at the Huffington Post. They say that standardized tests aren't an effective way to measure performance. We have to only look at student evaluations. Two responses. First, this is the Huffington Post. They're a journalistic blog site, basically. They don't report, they don't study student evaluations nearly at the level that Philip B. Stark has. Philip B. Stark is the chair of a literal statistics department. He literally studies stats for a living at Berkeley, and here's what he found. He said, first, the absolute best way that he argues to evaluate teacher effectiveness is what students do in the real world after they leave. And this is where we get to my negative correlation argument. I want you to remember the correlation between student evaluations that are positive and real life success is negative. In other words, the teachers that do the hardest get the usually the harshest reviews from students. And the results are that those students end up being the most successful. The same is true conversely, that for teachers that give the easiest workload, those students do worse later on in life, but guess what? They get the best evaluations. I literally dare anyone watching this video to pause it, go to ratemyprofessor.com. I want you to look at all the top ranked professors from my school, Southern Methodist University, and literally any other school you want. Because I guarantee virtually all of the 5.0s say, oh, this teacher is really easy. Easy A, not a lot of hard work. And my opponent is literally saying that the whims of a student body who really want to get through school with an A and please their parents who are probably paying for their tuition, the best way to determine job security is to allow a few consistent student bodies to decide whether or not they like the easiness. That's ridiculous. Extend all of the subpoints. Extend the argument about how this would water down content because students have an incentive to get through life easy. Extend the argument of extraneous factors. Philip B. Stark, again, he's already noted, extraneous factors are the dominant response in student evaluations. Nice mustache, cool tie, sexist, racist remarks, what have you. And third is build the bubble. We want teachers that are capable of pedagogical innovation, that are able to step forward and challenge students and conflict with them and do the stuff they don't like. Look, students should not have control over their teacher's job. Teachers should provide accurate content that challenges students, even if the students don't like it.
Now, when you talk about the fact that there are these sites and there are these unregulated methods, the policy over here says that students should rate their teachers, and teachers who are significantly below average should be fired. In the fact that schools do have a responsibility and they are the ones who are going to fire the teachers, therefore they will be the ones who regulate the evaluations that happen. Now, as far as you talk about why should they get fired and why that should come into effect at all. If schools are going to conduct these tests and students, like you said, you agree that schools should conduct these tests and feedback should be given. Students are expected to take them seriously, and schools have the responsibility to listen. If students fill out evaluations and consistently know that they are unhappy with the teacher, and despite this, if low-performing teachers aren't fired, the students themselves will see no merit in filling out these surveys and will take them as a joke. However, if they do see a change happening for them, if parents are more satisfied and with their academic progress, and if after repeated evaluations and warnings, they do not see a desired change, the exercise is going to go for waste. Now, as long as you talk about the security for teachers, since we are arguing a policy change, it would come in effect with the change in an existing law. As far as the contractual clause, in many teacher contracts, they are liable to determination of the contract if the school doesn't see them fit to teach or finds any shortcomings in the academic or teaching method. Furthermore, if a resolution was to pass, it would come with changes in law and changes in contracts, precisely because it says consistently. This would allow for schools to issue warnings and give notices at least 3 to 6 months prior, as it is okay with any other job, to inform these teachers and give them room for improvement and ultimately fire them if they do not respond. Now, when you talk about children having teachers focusing on good evaluations and watering down content, since surveys will have a more comprehensive and rounded approach and assess various aspects of teacher ability, not just academically, but even in class and their comfort level. The students will have to answer questions that also touch upon aspects beyond good grades. This will also make the teachers more aware of building positive relationships with their students. As far as you talk about watching down content, a Harvard study showed that the study that I mentioned by Ferguson showed that one aspect of the survey that they had designed was to focus on how challenging the students found their classrooms, and students negatively mark teachers down who did not create a challenging and debate-oriented classroom. Now, when you talk about children who do not have enough knowledge, students are better trained than adult observers at evaluating teachers. This isn't because they're smarter or because they have more cognitive ability, but it's because they have longer types of period to observe and form an opinion, as opposed to 30 minutes that a principal and a school inspector might have. This also lets kids evaluate the teachers in a day-to-day natural setting, as there are dozens of them as opposed to a single principal. If one kid had a grudge against a teacher or blew off the survey, his response alone could not sway the average. Neither could just a particular group of people, because this is happening consistently academically, and this is happening overall. While children will obviously lack of experience in younger grades, as they get older, they have cognitive ability to decide whether what they want most out of classrooms. If they are allowed to make these decisions, and if these decisions are implemented by the school, then they have a voice in their education, and this will actually even help them later in high school, because they are getting teachers that they feel are right for them, and
Okie doke. Let's start by clarifying once again what the resolution is saying. There's three arguments here in particular that my opponent is trying to get past. First, she ends by saying, let students have a voice. I'm all for students evaluating their teachers. The premise of the resolution saying students should rate their teachers is not the premise I take issue with. I take issue with the conclusion of the res. The teachers who are rated below average consistently and significantly should be fired. So don't let my opponent persuade you with this give students a voice rhetoric. They can have a voice. What I'm saying is, don't let that student voice drown out all sense of reason and rational thought. Don't let that voice drown out the tenure of teachers who need the security to innovate and to challenge students. Don't let that voice drown out the difficulty that students must experience, and don't let that voice silence a decent challenge that a teacher offers to their students. Let's step into the first argument where she says, well, students should still rate. Again, I agree with that premise. I disagree with the conclusion of the res. No problem there. Second, she says, oh, well, this would be below average. Look, my opponent keeps emphasizing her definitions of significant and consistent. I didn't take issue with them. She says, oh, well, they'll be issued warnings. My response is the warnings will be BS. The warnings will say, hey, your work is a little bit too hard. Hey, your work isn't easy enough for these students. Hey, according to these evaluations, a lot of people are saying you don't have a cool mustache, which, by the way, is what Philip B. Stark says. These extraneous factors are exactly what are most dominant on the evaluations. So if my opponent's like, oh, don't worry, pal, they'll have warnings, my response is, yeah, they'll have warnings for what? Not having a tie that the person liked a lot, not being like, there's even one example of a school in Arkansas, and this school was dominated by fundamentalist conservatives and Christians. I don't take issue with them, but just notice how much of a problem this is. The overwhelming response when they found out that the teacher at the school was gay semester, because he came out, the response of the student body, most of the evaluation said, hey, I'll pray for you. My opponent is saying, yeah, we should allow those students to decide whether or not the teacher should be fired or not, whether or not they should be gotten out of their job. Are we serious? So yeah, they'll get warnings. The warnings are BS. That's the whole problem. Second, she says, well, there was one example of one school in Oklahoma where the students mocked the fact that work was easy. I'm just going to use my opponent's words. My response is one school in Oklahoma. I want you to take the Philip B. Stark evidence as gospel in this round, because it is. Philip B. Stark has analyzed the use of student evaluations in schools all across the country, and the overwhelming consistency, the overwhelming response to student evaluations that they rate on easiness and extraneous factors, sometimes sexist, racist, homophobic, sometimes stuff as stupid as, well, I didn't like the outfit. Look, we already have the facts on this. We already know how students make decisions. Students want to get through class with an easy A. And are we seriously going to say that the evaluations taken at face value are enough? Lastly, my opponent doesn't get to rewrite the resolution. She doesn't say, well, the responses would get checked by this third party. The res says if they're rated below average, they're done.
You're still stuck on the point. You're still stuck on the fact that these are going to be individual surveys. When we're talking about a resolution where schools will fire teachers if they're rated below average, it means that this is a school standard test. And how else will a school know how to fire? If it's an individual site where students are posting, schools have no role in this. Therefore, when it comes to the fact that they're going to fire them, it also comes to the fact that when these ratings are done based on comprehensive evaluations, not just based on someone's mustache and what someone wears. It's a more behavioral and a more comprehensive test. Now, as far as you talk about education institutions that support this and your mega study apparently that supports this, I said a few education institutions that have been challenging this and wanting to incorporate these ratings. As a community, we're progressing towards a more flexible and inclusive method. Yale University just gave a generous grant to a development of an ingenious internet-based program called Classroom Compass that lets schools generate teacher evaluation forms. After students ranked their teachers in a variety of categories and completed evaluations, these would go into a computer and get scanned by proper analysis. This is just a software, not even a third-party person who has to come and use resources. Teachers have the ability to log into the website and see analysis of overall survey survey results, which are done. They're confidential, and they highlight areas in which a teacher should succeed and what were her lowest points. According to the Globe and the Mail, student evaluation should be taken seriously since they can serve as lazy checks, as checks on lazy, ineffective, and merely imperfect teachers. The Center for Teaching at Vanderbilt University too encourages student evaluations, and using this method even has dialogue for teachers on how to approach these evaluations the right way and deal with the fact that students aren't happy with them. The California Association of Student Councils publicly advocated the merits of students evaluating teachers and the student body in their school having a say in which teacher stays or which teacher doesn't. We are progressing towards a more competitive and fast-paced world, as you said. And overall, right now, when you're talking about the fact that, okay, there's going to be washing out of content, and you are actually treating these surveys and these evaluations as a joke, whereas when schools will take up, when the very fact that schools should take a part in it, because when individual sites right now currently not even comprehensively looking at these evaluations, and students aren't able to make these judgments because they don't have comprehensive surveys given by the schools. They already do want a voice, and this is the way that this is being projected. So when schools do interfere, and schools will rate, and when schools will show, they should be fired, because why are they, if students are going to be consistently and significantly dissatisfied with their teachers, if there's going to be a large group of people who are not going to be happy and the school doesn't do anything about them, they will have protection, because it says consistently. It means that there's going to be more than once that these teachers have been rated negatively, and there's going to be more than once that these teachers will know that they have been rated negatively. So it's like having someone who has a job and who comes to your job, and you repeatedly tell them that they're not good for the job, but they still keep on doing so without any scope of getting fired or without any competition. That's the way to inculcate competition even within teachers to maintain.
Let's clarify the debate through a few issues. The first thing my opponent says is, well, don't worry, these evaluations are comprehensive. My response is, nope. Look, the whole problem with student evaluations is that they don't accurately measure effectiveness. I'm not saying that you can't make a long survey. I'm not saying you can't ask a lot of complicated questions, but the data has been in on student evaluations for a while. And while student evaluations might be helpful at measuring, how fast did the teacher talk? How many hours per week did you put in? That's, there are some helpful elements in student evaluations to a degree. They don't accurately measure effectiveness. We already have the facts in on this. The two responses are negative correlation. That's the first one. This is the same argument from Philip B. Stark, who has analyzed the statistical results of student evaluations. The facts are already in. It's not a question. It's not even an argument. This is reality. Students that perform really well in the real world often give professors very bad ratings for the difficulty of their work, while conversely, students that get easy work give professors good ratings and don't do so well in the real world. Translation, the good professors get bad ratings and the bad professors get good ratings. The primary correlation is not positive or even neutral. As Philip B. Stark argues, it is negative. I'll post the source after this debate so that you can fact check that if you like. The second argument she talks about, she says, well, evaluations are still helpful because we want to serve the student body. Three responses. The first is extraneous factors. You don't serve the student body by legitimizing ridiculous assessments of teachers. And what we already know is that many student evaluations will be that way. My opponent hasn't responded to the core argument about student incentives. That if you, I'm not like, I haven't memorized the entire site, but I'm confident enough in this position to say you can literally pause this video, go to ratemyprofessor.com like I did. I looked up Southern Methodist University, my school, and I checked out the professors. Way up there is Ben Voth. And if you look, he has a 5.0, you scroll down through the ratings and all of them are easy A, really easy professor, didn't give me a lot of work. Those are the things students care about the most. You think all students are these like shining gold geniuses that are ready to just, plow through the trenches and have a hard semester and learn? Of course not. Why would we place the entirety of the career control of a professor in the hands of a class? It's freaking ridiculous. Let's step down into the two issues. The first is advice versus edict. I'm okay with student evaluations advising teachers. I'm not okay with it being an edict that says if you're below average consistently, you get the axe. The second argument is no third party. The resolution doesn't say these suggestions will be checked by a third party and then evaluated. It says if they're below average with consistency, they're out. And that is dangerous.
fixated on the fact that this is because the reason I'm saying is because you're very fixated on the fact that there are these sites and students aren't looking at the comprehensive side exactly, which is why schools will have, which is why schools, when we talk about schools, because when we're talking about schools' roles is getting fired, which means that schools will play a role in this, and therefore you are completely not even acknowledging the fact that these studies will assess comprehensively what the teachers are doing, not just academically, but how comfortable the teachers are, how they're teaching in different classrooms. And as far as your incentives of students, who I like to quote a study for that, the study I mentioned by Harvard examined 1,99,000 surveys and found that less than one half of 1% of students did responded to questions without even like looking at them or taking them as a joke. Student surveys are far less volatile, and thereby by assessing them solely based on grades, that's like not good. Kids' answers for a given teacher, in the study, kids' answers for a given teacher remain similar from class to class and from fall to spring. At the end of the year, yes, some Memphis teachers were dismissed for low evaluation, but that was less than 2% of the faculty, and that improved student happiness and student involvement in their education, which shows that this might not lead to a large decline in staff, which would allow for genuine shifting of staff members for the better. Now, as far as you talk about the challenge that students face in class, I already cited a study, and I've already told you that students would have, in these comprehensive studies, they have had a factor of how challenging or how inspiring they found these teachers to be, and the fact that there are a lot of students who negatively mark their teachers down, which also, the study that I mentioned, which also resulted in them getting fired in the Memphis University study, which I mentioned, because they weren't challenging enough and because they weren't getting inspired enough. Now, as far as you talk about the students only putting in good evaluations and, in the future, like botting out of content and not being able to, cope up with it. Exactly. When schools will, because you tell me, the schools and teacher relationships are done to cater to students. The students are the core crux of the school, and therefore when they are given regulated, when they're given this, my point of having these comprehensive tests and therefore having an effect is so that schools will play a role in this. And without an effect, why would the students take these seriously? If the schools are not going to fire their teachers, if they're just going to be made, and after repeatedly, you can understand that it's consistently and significantly way below average, and consistently after they're repeatedly given these evaluations, and if they do fill it out properly, and if there is no action that is done, even after the teachers have been consulted and the teachers have been told to improve, why would the students take it seriously? So you agree to the fact that these feedback should be given, but then this entire exercise is futile if there's no action that is being implemented. And therefore, I think you have confused the resolution a little bit, because we are in part arguing two resolutions, and by being con, you're disfavoring, if not one, at least both. So in that sense, this will create a challenging environment even for teachers to be on their toes, for teachers to like put in extra effort, because right now we're seeing issues of quality control everywhere in most schools.
If I have an uncle named Larry, who I trust a lot and I feel like is really informed about life, I'm likely to act in a lot of the ways he gives me suggestions. But I wouldn't say that at the drop of a pin, if he just says something a lot, I should just do it without thinking. I should just go and launch in. If he says drive off a cliff, I'll go for it. If he says pop this pill, I'll do it. That isn't the reaction we should have. We should always have third parties. We should always have extra analysis, and that is what my opponent has failed to remember. The resolution doesn't give us room for checking power, for reviewing evaluations. If the resolution said something like, teachers who are significantly and consistently rated below average by reasonable estimations or by legitimate protocol violations, if there was some legitimacy to student evaluations already, she'd have a case. But she doesn't. That's not how it works. Let's step down into the main voting issues. First, her main argument is, I know it hasn't been comprehensive before, but it'll be comprehensive this time. My response is that doesn't make it accurate. Asking more questions on a student survey doesn't make the evaluation accurate. I'm going to read you the report. Now, this report is from Stacy Patton, who's the assistant professor of multimedia journalism, who talks about the same author that I've met. Such concerns aside, do student evaluations work as a tool for measuring professors? Philip B. Stark gives his credentials, has studied the question. His findings: evaluations are little more than a popularity contest. It's easy to game the system. Good professors get bad ratings, and bad professors get good ones. There's not an easier way to sum up the con advocacy. My opponent has a smattering of examples where teachers cross the line or were upsetting their students and says, well, the solution has to be to, with any consistency of student evaluations being negative, to just cut the axe, to rip them out and pull them away from the school. Let's get down to my first voting issue of advise versus edict.
Once again, as I mentioned before, you can still vote for the con side and have student evaluations. You don't have to reject the first premise of the resolution to accept all of it. What I'm saying is these evaluations should advise and inform professors. In other words, if they have a legitimate suggestion like slow down, then yes, they should slow down. But if the advice is something like, hey, we don't like the fact that you give us homework twice a week, they shouldn't change. The problem is there's no limit, there's no condition, there's no freaking asterisk in the resolution for you to vote pro. The asterisk doesn't say, by the way, if these evaluations are legitimate, then they should get the X. And that's the whole problem, that you are taking the resolution at face value. You don't have conditions, you don't have limits on what the evaluations say. The second one you can remember as what is currently working. Philip B. Stark has already noted that there is a negative correlation between hard homework teachers and the easy ones. In other words, student evaluations give the highest ratings to the easiest professors, and that is a fact. We know that psychologically too, that they have an incentive to want easy work. So do you really want to place the vice grip of control in the profession of a teacher in the hands of a class that wants an easy A? I say no. Allow them to advise